Test 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test. All right. All right. Here we go.
Are we gonna share any links, or what are we doing?
Links. Oh.
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me get this here.
Twitter.
So yeah, this was the only way I could figure out how to do this, was to take the link you just gave, which opens YouTube, and then when you open YouTube, in the lower left-hand corner of your thing is a little display card that says "Be part of the conversation." Click here to join the audience for the Hangout, and this is the link that I believe gets tweeted out for the live Hangout. Because somebody can ask a question here. Like, this is what I've watched when I've gone to watch the live ASP.NET community stand-up. And sometimes he turns on the applause meter. I don't think he does it anymore, but he used to. And like, as you were watching it, they might say something. I suppose you were supposed to hit the green or the brown, the red, and they probably thought it was. I mean, to be honest with you, it is kind of dumb. So.
I guess the question thing is disabled. Like, I can see questions, but I can't
Yeah, but I can come
respond to
over
them
here
or
and
post
say.
them.
I can come over here and say this is a test. Now, when I submit, it should show up in our list of questions over here. Not that anyone's watching the show, but
Yeah, oh, there you go. Okay, but how do I respond to you?
I don't know that we can. I'm not sure that maybe only the admin can clear them, possibly.
I mean, I see.
Oh no,
question.
I can click delete question. So I guess I can click
Where
it.
do you see delete question?
There's a little crazy like pokey thing in the upper right.
I don't
What
have
I
that.
love about this brilliant interface is that it disappears. When you move the mouse far enough away, they're like, no need for an affordance here. But if you get it closer to the upper right hand of the question, then it says, oh, here's magic UI you didn't know. I really hate this. This is the way designers think software should be built now, though. Hide the UI. So now I'm going to delete the question.
Well, don't delete it. Jess, do you see this question? Can you respond to it, or because I can't?
I don't think you can respond. I think it's just meant to be like the list.
Oh, okay. And then we're supposed to talk about it, I guess.
Theoretically, people are watching the show and they're like,
yes, I can see them. I can delete them.
Jess, I just wanted to tell you how brilliant you are, and then we would see it up there.
I can select them.
We would go delete it.
And then we answer them, and then I say done, and it means it's answered.
So, okay, so yeah, I don't have any of that stuff. I can see the questions, though.
Yeah.
I can't.
I mean, I just was trying to figure out how this stuff worked.
Well, that works. So it came up in the Q&A section, and yeah, I selected it. We answered it. I clicked done.
All right, now I can't see it at all. So I assume because you clicked done.
Yeah, I clicked done, I guess. Oh, so now you can go to answered questions?
I don't see them there.
I saw it for a second and then it disappeared. Okay, whatever. All right, is that one viewer you again, Chris?
It probably is until I bail out of it.
Yeah.
Why don't you bail out and let's make sure you don't get a Hangouts.
Okay, cool. Are we ready to go? We gonna do this?
Yep, let's do it.
All right. Hopefully I don't have my levels too high.
Are we gonna time again, or are we doing this?
Time?
Yeah, we were pausing for 20 seconds at the beginning.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
You start 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Are you ready, Chris?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, and welcome to the Static Void Podcast. I'm Jess Chadwick.
I'm Todd Slater.
And I'm Chris Gomez.
And we are your hosts. We're recording this on the evening of May 16th, 2016, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about something that Todd and I in particular have been debating for quite some time, and I know that Chris has some pretty strong thoughts on it as well, and that is the web browser as a development platform. The three of us have been in the industry for roughly 20 years or so each, So we've seen the evolution of the web as a platform and experienced all of the pain along the way. And now we've seen it kind of evolve a little bit and get a little bit more mature, and we've all been spending a lot of time developing in it lately. So, Todd, I think I'm going to hand the floor over to you to begin with, just because I know that you and I have had some mighty big debates over the past couple of years about this, so I'm eager to get into it.
Yes. Let me get on my soapbox. Serverlate was awesome. We should have kept Serverlate. We're all done. All right. Anyway, yeah, Jess and I have talked about this for a while, that as a platform, the web browser is very good for content type stuff, or e-commerce, or video streaming, things you typically would do in a web site. Where it kind of presents challenges and things to deal with is when we start thinking about web applications, particularly if we want to talk about stuff we'd kind of build every day, which are line of business or high-end dashboard type applications. Things start to break down. We still got to deal with the DOM, we have to deal with memory management, and all these things that you typically need to deal with in an application. And it's still complex, it's still hard. And while a lot of frameworks like jQuery and Angular and React and stuff have come on the scenes, they're really add-ons to the experience. And some of them can be really complex to work with, and sometimes if you try to mix like Angular and jQuery, you end up having to jump through all these different hoops that it's just still a pain point, particularly around dealing with the DOM, memory management, even navigating between different pages in a single page application. It's challenging. It's really hard for developers to get started, and you end up with this sort of JavaScript soup, which you have to deal with when you start a new project. Do I want to use framework X or framework Y? What version? What version of these things work with what browsers? It just ends up being this big mess to deal with.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. I think that is definitely at least an hour's worth of fodder right there.
Yeah, it's super painful, right? And I guess if you've been around enough to have watched this thing grow, it grew organically.
Yeah.
It was the simplest thing that could possibly work to let you go to GeoCities and make a page about your cats.
Make some blinking text.
And anyone could do it, though.
Yeah.
All you needed was Notepad and HTML HTML has arcane crap in it still. I mean, and it's never going to go away. And yet, you could sort of learn it by watching, just by looking at other people's pages. And this whole group of people entered our industry because they were willing to pick up that HTML. And I actually think that the software developers took the web back. Because
our web.
It wasn't that long ago that if you knew HTML and then maybe you knew a little bit about this arcane thing called Flash, and a little bit of Photoshop so you could make your own images and backgrounds and stuff, you were the web developer. And those of us who were living in MFC land or maybe on other platforms with C++ or C were like, yeah, I don't know how to build things for that thing.
So I think right off the bat, I really want to kind of draw a line in the sand in terms of what development is, what web development is. So the topic of this show is browser as a development platform. And while what you just described, meaning create some HTML, maybe create a little bit of JavaScript to add a little bit of behavior to that HTML, but basically just creating pages, and those pages had a little bit of behavior in them, that was development maybe 15, 20 years ago. But where I'm really trying to draw the line in the sand here now, and feel free to disagree with me, is that development now is much closer to that kind of SPA model, right, where you kind of hit a page, you hit an HTML page, and it loads a whole bunch of stuff, and you don't really leave that page very much, right? It may look like you leave that page, right? You may have transitions within that page that even look like kind of a page navigation, but you're kind of sitting at that one HTML, that one URL, right? That one HTML page. You never really leave from there.
Yep.
So that's kind of that's where I feel like we are. That's development at this point, and the stuff that used to be development is really just very interactive pages at this point, right? So adding a little bit of behavior to some click handlers or things like that, or maybe even submitting a form through an AJAX request versus actually a full page post, but not like a highly immersive application. So I think, Chris, you mentioned that it really kind of took off, and I think the biggest thing that made it take off is that it was just, as you said, it was easy to kind of get started and learn the fundamental concepts. Although to learn them to do them right took a lot more work and a lot more learning. But it was just very easy to deploy changes.
Oh yeah.
Those were the conversations that we had all the time. So like in the early 2000s, I had a bunch of conversations of, do we go thick client or do we go web, right? So it was, people were still really kind of anxious and really untrusting of the whole web thing, and they weren't really bought into it, right? And so, and having things like Flash around and eventually Silverlight kind of clouded the waters even more. Like, here's kind of a, quote, thick client that you can deliver through the web, right? So it seems like the perfect middle ground. But even taking those out of there, they're like thick clients where we run installers and everything, especially in a business setting, a line of business setting where we kind of control everything internally. They were still a really viable option, but it seemed like web kept winning out for really one main reason, and that was ease of deployment of updates, right?
The IT department, even when they had complete control, still hated deploying thick client versus, oh, hey, just go to this link.
Yeah. And I think that still wins today. I mean, I think that's still what's driving it.
You can even just like put bookmarks in a document, or you can. I remember there was a time when I would start a new job, and the browser that was installed like already had company links in a folder. Like they made it part of your profile. And super simple, always updated. You never have to worry about update. It's just what's the current state of the app. It's evergreen.
Or
just
you
funny,
have
we
a
had evergreen intranet sites before we had evergreen browsers.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Or in addition to those pre-installed browser links, you just have a page, right? That is the one link you need, and then from there you got everything else, or a portal that you can get to, right? And so that's kind of a regular web page that kind of links off to, quote, web applications.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I brought up earlier about the simplicity of the static web, and I think we'll move on from this, is that I still respect a site that knows when not to get distracted by being a single page app.
Yep.
I don't necessarily think it has to be one or the other. I think that a really well thought out design might say these sections are really just landing points.
Yep.
And if we give the user a good experience to get to the browser app, where we're, like you said, Jess, one request, and from here on out it's all Ajax, then I respect when I see that. I say, hey, you really thought about the experience. But, you're right. From this point, I imagine the pain is building that app, building the single-page style app.
And I get really disappointed and frustrated on the other way, too, where you come across this site that's just a complete spa, and it's just completely gratuitous. And you're like, this is just content. What are you doing?
What are you doing?
Yeah.
I think the one area that's sort of, there's still complexity that we have to deal with today compared to even 4 or 5 years ago, is the idea of responsive design. The idea of trying to have even a content site respond, you still have to start relying on frameworks. Something like a Bootstrap, where you have lots of CSS, but you also now have JavaScript that's trying to run things. Yeah. And even just adding that simple requirement of I want this to be able to stretch to different resolutions of things, it adds a lot of overhead and a lot of complexity just to do that. Where something, if it was more built into the browser, I use the example of if you ever worked in Java or Servlet or anything, you had this grid layout. We don't really have that today in the web. We can add Bootstrap to get something similar, but we're still dealing with this divs and floating divs and all kind of crazy things. It's just not a fundamental thing built into the underlying framework.
Yeah, it's a blank canvas that allows you to do a lot of stuff. I kind of take that as a good thing. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. It would be nice if you had kind of a built-in grid system, but frankly, that is why I think that frameworks like Bootstrap or Bootstrap itself have really grown in popularity, is because it is the grid system of the web.
Yeah.
Right.
But under the covers,
it fills that gap.
Under the covers, why it's presenting you a grid, it's still floating divs and doing all kind of box model. It's adding a lot of stuff that if you need to dive in to figure out what's going on, you get back into the weeds real quick.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, and we get, it's painful too, because what is a media query for resolution mean when I might be in the same resolution here on this, desktop monitor as like my phone? It could be the same resolution. What does that mean?
Totally. Now, when I have these conversations about responsive design, I like to give the example of the Surface Pro, the Surface,
Yep.
right? So it is a tablet, and then you attach a keyboard to it.
Right.
Nothing has changed. Nothing, it's a tablet with a touch screen, and then you attach a keyboard, and then you remove the keyboard. Has the form factor changed?
Nope.
Some people might argue yes. Some people might argue no, right? But
The experience
to your
changed.
point, the experience changed.
You touch now, yeah.
Yes, you've introduced another input to the experience, but to your point, Chris, the resolution hasn't changed. Certainly,
Yeah,
that's
it's
not
ridiculously
debatable.
hard to detect, right? And
Yeah, right.
we learned a long time ago we couldn't design for user agents anymore because new phones were coming out all the time. We gave up on that. We gave up on the user
Yeah, the
agent.
server-side solution didn't work.
Yeah, it worked okay when really your browser. There were like 3 browsers for a while.
Really,
And-
until you Android
Now
took
forget
off.
it. Yeah, now there's no
Android
way.
has thousands of them. Anyway, my point with bringing this up is I think it was a good transition to our other things. We do have a lot of good frameworks like jQuery and Angular, JS and stuff, and React that kind of try to address these things. One of the problems I have with that is I really kind of almost want like a .NET runtime for the web browser, like a common runtime. All these things kind of still address the one pain point, which is the DOM, which is definitely a pain point. But doing multi-threading, doing, like I said, responsive design, just doing common application things, maybe I'm just, because I work in the .NET world, it's just so easy to say, I want to use this, and just use it. And I don't have to really think about it. Well, with the DOM,
It's the runtime, right? So
Uh-huh.
JavaScript is the language, but the JavaScript runtime and the DOM, they are your environment. They are at that .NET level. And then on top of that, these frameworks, Angular, jQuery, whatever they are like the frameworks that you use with .NET, right? So I use ASP.NET in .NET. I use WPF in .NET, right? Those are all frameworks on top of that core runtime. The examples I gave happen to be delivered by Microsoft and centralized, but that just doesn't matter. They're frameworks nonetheless.
I guess my point is the DOM is still sort of that central thing you have to deal with. I kind of almost really wish there was a better abstraction.
Right. So I think
or a better way approach, a more common approach that was more universal.
So I can sum up my thoughts of web development and the browser as a dev platform in 2 ways. The pro for me is that the structure inherently encourages a nice separation of concerns. It encourages it. It doesn't require it or demand it. It encourages it. So you've got your HTML as your view and your JavaScript, right? And then even your view is split up into styling that you can put into a CSS, right? Nothing is stopping you from putting inline styles except for conventions and me slapping you on the wrist. But like that at its heart already is in kind of encouraging you, like, put your behavior in your JavaScript, put your HTML and your markup and your layout and everything in your HTML, and kind of separate those concerns from the beginning. Then from there, you can apply other concepts like a true MVC framework that introduces things like controllers, so kind of breaks down the coding portion of it, the logic portion of it, into a model and a controller, right? And so HTML is still the view, but now you've gotten a little more granular on the code side. But on the flip side of it is, I do agree with you, Todd, right? Like the DOM and the JavaScript runtime in particular, they're like a roommate that you find on Craigslist, right? Like, you don't like this person, they're eating all your cheese and everything, right? They don't live together. They share the same space, but they do not get along well together.
Yeah,
right? And so you have that kind of awkward cohabitation, but they have to work together. And I think that's where a lot of these frameworks really come into play, is by helping you avoid those places where they conflict or they don't work very well together.
Yeah, for me, it almost seems like while we're building better frameworks and things, there's still like a big giant hack on top of everything. I recently had to deal with it. A multi-threaded type environment, and we decided to look at using web workers, and it worked for what we're trying to do, but the web worker was really just a hack. It's just a hidden page sitting behind the scenes, and that's how the browser makes it work. And it just felt like this is totally the wrong way to do it, but it's the only way the browser really gave you that true multi-threading separation to deal with things. The other thing I wanted to kind of comment on was, you talked about, okay, we have CSS and HTML and JavaScript, and they're all good in separating concerns, but that's also 3 different things the developer needs to learn. And I think that's
Sure.
also another pain point to deal with. While we have these frameworks and we have all these tools, as a developer, I have to learn 5 different things or 10 different things to be proficient, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does add to the level of complexity in building these kind of applications.
That's true even in technologies like Silverlight, right? Like Silverlight happens to be a web technology, but WPF, right? You're
Yeah.
learning XAML and you're learning C Sharp. And some might argue that the styling within that XAML is yet another language that you have
Yeah,
to
well, yeah.
learn.
Well, I'm not
You
going to say
know?
it wasn't.
Well,
it's
and then if you want to be
complexity.
proficient with WPF, you're going to get guided towards a pattern, the MVVM pattern. So you have to
Exactly.
learn that too.
Yeah, right. So I would not say that there's inherently more or less to learn in the browser space versus a more thick client space.
Well, I guess it really, WPF had his own little set of challenges to work with. If you think before, like you were talking about 10 years ago, whatever, when people were making, I'm going to make a thick client or I'm going to make a web client, the real choice was I wanted WinForms or web forms, or I wanted a Windows application versus a web application. And most of the people who come from that background, they never had to deal with those things, right? They didn't have to think about CSS and stuff. They just pretty much just dragged the VB way, right? Drag the text box on and do all what they need to do and wire up the data.
Yeah, that's because everything was Battleship Gray, and you just laid it out in a grid system, right? So, I mean, to your point earlier about there's no grid system in the web, sure. You add Bootstrap, I agree. It doesn't solve everything, but it gets you a lot of the way there. But I mean, if you want to go into the website and go and put XY coordinates on everything and do absolute sizing and positioning, just like you did in a WinForms application, go for it, right? Like, so let me kind of narrow this down a little bit more. What is your ideal development environment, your ideal development platform? Let's go from there and kind of compare and contrast to that.
So I guess what I'm kind of looking for is, and I use .NET as sort of as an example, a unified platform where I just simply want to do threading. So I want to do a using browser.threading, and it's there. I don't care under the covers how Chrome does it or Firefox does or whatever. I just want to have that common interface to work with. Same thing with HTTP requests, right? I mean, the way to do with jQuery or XML HTTP is fairly standard, but it's still lots of plumbing code I have to work with. Where if it was just simply like a .NET is web client, or even how Angular does it, HTTP client, it's just easier to work with. Probably the biggest challenges I see are the DOM, dealing with needing to totally change the UI. We're talking about single-page applications. You have to do a lot of DOM manipulation to change things. And then multi-threading is probably the other area I've seen have a lot of complexity.
So, multi-threading, I got to come back to. We've said it a lot.
Yeah.
We humans, we're terrible at writing threaded code.
Yes, we are.
We're just really bad at it, and our languages don't help us. And I think one of the things that actually made JavaScript sort of work is the fact that they said, we're going to be single-threaded, and if you have some work to do, go schedule something, and we'll get to it in the event loop.
Yeah, done.
And yeah, that definitely was a paradigm shift for those of us who were used to just like creating a background thread. But the fact of the matter is we were working in evented systems already.
Yep.
Now, I know that Web Workers is an attempt to try and give us the ability to really spin up compute somewhere else. But the thing that bugs me is we're really, really bad at reasoning about code that says, okay, you know, this function might be running when another one is. And what JavaScript guarantees you, like you can just throw all that away because you know every line of code is not running alongside another one until you bring in something like Web Workers, but they do happen in an isolated space, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I also know that the languages that are popular in the world, so if I just say, you know, things like, well, the languages that were popular for the last 20 years, .NET and Java, just let you hang yourself with multi-threading. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think even the comment that we just had in the questions is that, yes, we are breaking ground heading towards languages that really try to push you towards doing this the right way, but it's not what people are using.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of looking at it very similar to applications I've built over the last 4 or 5 years. We've had a lot of stuff where we just need to be able to go off and get data from another system, or while the chart control is being rendered, I want to be able to let the user do other things and not be blocking. And if you get these more and more complex applications, I'll call them desktop-like applications, it's really hard not to have spinners on your screens because you don't want the user to do anything because it's spinning around doing something.
But I mean, we already defer like a web request to to the event loop, so it eventually responds, right? I mean, the rendering can continue.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a browser-specific issue to be blocking the user from entering input while you're waiting for a request to complete, right? You have that same issue whether it's a thick client or a web browser client.
Well, in thick clients, in some platforms, WF as an example, you can easily separate that out, so the UI thread is never blocked. Well, in JavaScript, yes, the AJAX call is sort of like that, but what if you need to make 6 different AJAX calls? Or I'll give you a real-world use case. I had a case where the user wanted to be able to keep typing in the grid, but every time they made a change, it had to sync to the server. So that's why we had to use web workers. We had to almost queue up things so that the queuing back to the server didn't prevent them from being able to type things in.
Well, I've seen people just using reactive frameworks, and I don't mean React, I mean just like the reactive framework for JavaScript or something, or Bacon, and accomplish something that's very similar.
Again, there are frameworks that do let you do it. Just using promises give you some of the same stuff.
I mean, you don't have to use a framework.
Yeah.
JavaScript itself is flexible enough that you can build that yourself. It's just, heck, somebody else already built it, right? Why should I build a reactive functional framework when I could just use Bacon? And I'm being totally unfair. Bacon is a reactive functional framework for JavaScript so that you don't have to invent the plumbing, and there's many like it. I'm just plucking one out of midair, right?
Part of my point, though, is if you had a universal API, we'll call it, or platform to work with, you wouldn't need to care if it's Bacon or not, right? Or you'd be able to plug in Bacon or whatever else. When you want to use Bacon, you have to go learn how to use Bacon.
Well, that's
if
true.
I want to use Q, I have to go learn how to use Q.
But now let's look at what happened in .NET here, and I'm not going to be able to speak for our friends over in Java land, right? How many different ways are there to make a web request in .NET now?
Right.
How many different asynchronous patterns do we have? I think we have 4 now.
Right.
We have the one
and to go further on the AJAX request in .NET, I think you said, or at least implied earlier, that it was easier or simpler to make that request in .NET. It's not. You still, even the web client that you referred to, that's still several lines of code. You create a new one, build the request, execute the request, respond to it.
I mean, I work with
code looks almost exactly the same in the browser with an.
I work with some really smart Java guys, and they were looking at .NET code, and they weren't using the system.NET HTTP web space. You know why? Because they just Googled and found a way to do it, and the article was a little old, so they were using the older stuff. And so here I have to come, right? And this isn't a complaint. They're brilliant guys, right? It's just that here I come along only with the benefit of experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Say, oh, you should be using the newer version. And they look at you like, well, how would you possibly know? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't. There's no way you can possibly know.
Again, I'm using .NET as an example.
Well,
That's
what
something
if
we all
happened in the JavaScript space?
Yeah.
Like you just said, let's add a reactive framework right in. Let's just build it right in. But then someone like Jess comes along, I'm going to pick on you, Jess, and says, yeah, you did an okay job there, but I wish I had a little bit more, so here's my improved version.
Yep.
And so now I've got to go pick that.
I do.
And again, I'm kind of looking at this more of standardization, maybe to a degree. I know the WC3 has even talked about some of this stuff as sort of a future thing they want to work on, coming up with, they call it the open web platform, of a common way certain things are just done. Today we rely on our frameworks, right? And I'm a big fan of Angular, a big fan of jQuery, but for some people they don't want to use them. Or for some scenarios it's overkill or it adds complexity. Just because we have frameworks that solve these problems, they're not necessarily they're like add-ons or band-aids to the problem. We're still dealing with the underlying problem.
So I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think the reason that both Chris and I are just jumping on top of you is that the point we're trying to make is when we compare to the browser-based development to something like .NET, these problems, these issues that you're talking about, we're not saying they're not issues. We're just saying that they exist in pretty much every development platform, right? They're not specific or unique to the web. They manifest themselves differently, like the web memory management.
Yeah, right.
We might not have mature tooling to handle that very well. Or I completely agree with you in terms of doing asynchronous code and web workers and everything that solves. Yeah, that's still a relatively immature space. But all of these other problems that you're talking about, to Chris's point earlier, threading, async await, and just parallelism, like humans are just inherently bad at that. So that's going to be difficult.
Like we had no thread safe collections in .NET until what, halfway between the beginning and now?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't remember when they came in, but I know it wasn't 2002.
I understand your point. Again, I was just using .NET as an example. So we can
no, and so you're not wrong. You're not. But so let me maybe make this point is that I think the reason we're stuck with what we have for now, I actually think we might have some pathways out. But originally Java applets were supposed to be that thing, and they didn't work. And there were, I think, some of it was that they were super slow, but the other thing is that it just turned out that the natural interface of the document and even the underlying links gave, my grandmother affordances, so to use a design term, that you just kind of knew what to do. And the back button made sense. In fact, the back button, I think, made so much sense that when you look at every browser, it has a prominent place, and we've sort of taken the forward button and said, that really confused people. The forward button is crazy confusing, but the back button makes sense. Like, I don't know where I am. Well, maybe you do know where you are. I just want to get back to where I was.
Undo, and that works, right? Yeah. So sometimes it turns out that Java applets threw away the affordances, and so we abandoned it. And now you're right though. Silverlight was promising. For all of Flash's problems, forget the technical problems for a moment. Promising, right?
Yeah.
If we just forget some of the technical issues, but in the end. You know what? Well, Microsoft tried other things, like with XPaps, like let's use WPF.
Yeah. There definitely are active documents really back in the old days.
What kills it
is a delivery mechanism, right? Let's not even pretend it's a browser technology. Let's just use the browser to deliver it.
But what happens is that because these things were always shepherded by one company, whether it was Sun or Microsoft or whatever, the other companies just said, "Screw you," right? Yeah. Silverlight is never coming here. Yes. And that was the end of Silverlight, right?
Yes.
I know that Steve Jobs never wrote the letter that Silverlight's never coming here, but he did say it about Flash.
Yes.
We all knew. We're like, well, Silverlight's never going to the iPhone either.
Yep.
So they've all, like, to say we all pointed guns at each other's heads and said, okay, I'm willing to stick with the standard we have, but no more. I'm not letting your crap get in here, whether it's what's the language that Google's really tried to get in? I'm going to forget it now.
Not Clojure.
No, Dart.
Dart.
What? Dart. Right. Dart. Yeah, Dart was going to be a replacement, right? Why not Dart? Well, because it's yours.
Yeah. Right.
And then there's this other dual thing that's pushing at us, which is to say, do I really want to make my mobile web browser so good that you won't build apps that I get 30% of?
That's a whole other discussion.
That's a different discussion. Yeah. So, I think we can kind of dispense with that and move on, because I think there's other really good topics. But I feel like, yes, WebAssembly has promise there, but there's this there's this standoff going on where they're all saying, I'll support standards, but don't add anything. Yeah. Don't you add anything either, because I won't support it, and then we'll kill it. Kill it because
that's ultimately part of my pain point is we're dealing with the lowest common denominator.
Sure.
And trying to build applications that adds a super lot of complexity.
We are, but the lowest common denominator has gotten really good, right? That has historically been the biggest problem, and that's why in the early 2000s you absolutely needed a framework like jQuery, because jQuery handled the browser incompatibilities, right? And just the flat out different APIs and sometimes completely missing APIs. But then as everything matured, call it standards or not, but often it's in the browser vendor's best interest to just come up with things that work, that are, quote, standard, whether there's a standard or not, right? It just to make sure that their customers aren't upset, because they're not pretending that everybody is, choosing their browser and just kind of ignoring the fact that anything else exists, because the moment you get upset with your browser, you're going to go and switch to another one.
Yeah.
Right? And so they have an interest in keeping you on their platform, on their browser, and that is make it work with the sites that I use the most, right? So we don't need that anymore. And so now the kind of web standards have evolved to the fact where you don't need jQuery, because jQuery affordances, the jQuery quote APIs, right? The way that jQuery allowed you to interact with the DOM are kind of right there now in the DOM APIs themselves. You don't need another library.
Unless you want to do things beyond the basic stuff. You want to build high-end charts, grids, composite complexity.
Right. So, well, to Chris's point earlier, I have a different way of doing that than you do. So for me, the ability to choose a different framework on top of this core standard stuff than you do is a good thing, in my opinion, right? The variety of frameworks that I have to choose from is a good thing. The fact that there is a new one added every 10 minutes, some people can consider that a good thing, some people consider it a bad thing. I'm not going to go there. I mean, it does, if nothing else, it adds more variety, it adds more choice.
But aren't we settling? I mean, haven't we settled? Like, we adopted the web as this platform because it was easy for us to get started. But now we're trying to add more and more complexity. I feel like we're just kind of settling.
We're settling, but we're settling on a very solid foundation, a mature foundation that's been around
I'll give
forever.
Solid.
It's mature, right?
Mature.
So
I think we're having trouble moving forward because
you can get through corporate proxies all you want.
Yeah, I mean it's
JavaScript, right?
It's the lowest common denominator. I use that as an example. So just kind of bigger picture thing. So there's other problems I see kind of all this stuff that because of the way it's all open and all those things. I've dealt with cases where we built an application, it worked great until the user opened another tab and they were streaming YouTube and all of a sudden it took the browser down and they're coming back to us. Well, your app's leaking memory. I'm like, no, you're opening another tab or you have 17 toolbars.
But again, the modern browser implementations are more and more, and I think pretty much all of them do this at this point, at least the big ones, Chrome and IE. When you open up a new tab, it's a new process, right? So they're isolating those processes. So you can say, like, go kill this tab. Don't kill my whole browser. Don't steal away my resources. Go and kill this tab. Leave the other one open, right? So then it becomes a process debate, a process argument. So it's now the same conversation that you would have even if you had a thick client app. When you open YouTube and it's taking system resources away, it doesn't matter whether it's the client or a browser tab or not.
I've definitely seen, well, I've used Firefox more than Chrome. I've definitely seen Firefox not do that too well, or that if one of the tabs crashes, it can take down the whole browser. I think Chrome does a little better, but there's still leaking memory leaks in Chrome too. So again, I'm kind of looking at it as we're settling because it's easy and convenient to do this, that maybe we need to take a step back and start saying, what if we can get all these same conveniences, but we had a true host to work with? A couple examples I used in the notes were like something like Flex or Serverless Add a Browser. I want all the tech stuff, but what if I could load my app as a host in a host? It was independent of the browser, and it was doing what it wanted to do.
Why do you want that? What does that give you above the common browser?
So it gives me more control. I don't have to worry about the other tabs opening. I don't have to worry about toolbars and all the other stuff because I'm fixing my platform.
You have to be concerned about system resources. You're still sharing the system resources. Those are fine.
Yes, you're definitely sharing system resources. But again, it's a different kind of experience. The other thing is maybe there's ways to bootstrap with certain frameworks. Like I only want these frameworks, and you can package it up like you could like in Silverlight and stuff. And then you only worry about that being downloaded as one thing as opposed to hundreds of things.
I don't know what you mean by that. I can do that in the web now. I can only choose Angular and jQuery, and I'm not going to accidentally get React.
No, correct. But how many files do you need for Angular? How many files do you need for jQuery? They're all not just one. You need at least 3 or 4 if you use the minified versions of them.
I can bundle and minify them.
Yes, you could. But how many people are doing that? I guarantee you.
Oh yeah,
20 or 30% maybe are doing that. Lots of people.
There's a lot of poor practice with that, sure.
Sure, but there's poor practice everywhere.
Are we in a better place if we tell people here go install the full framework? Like we're mostly a .NET show, so as long as you have .NET 4.6, which is a 200 meg download and install, is that a better place? I don't know. Especially when
I don't know.
There's a demand from developers to say, can I ship the framework with my app so that way I don't have to be in that bad place of saying, well, are you sure you're up to date? That's tough.
Yeah, I mean, all this is tough. I'm really trying to think. Really, like I said, these are the pain points I've seen.
Yeah. Look, I understand. So,
and I work with a lot of different developers across different organizations. So maybe as being a consultant where I have to go to every place and try to explain the same thing over and over again. It's the same pain over and over and over again. That with .NET, we're like, here, we're just going to use .NET 4 or 5. And then
You're saying you don't have any pain going from different development teams that are using .NET.
Wow.
I don't believe that for a second.
The pain is more manageable, put it that way. Or more
I don't
predictable.
believe that. I don't believe that for a second.
You get people who agree. We'll start with that. People are like, okay, let's do not 4 or 5. The minute you want to say let's use Angular, they'll have the one guy over here wants, well, I want to use React, and some other guy will be like, we can do everything in native, and then you get into what version of jQuery you want to use.
I have that same conversation with .NET developers. Are we using Web API? Are we using WCF? Are we using what's the other one that I use?
Can we use F Sharp?
Are we using F Sharp?
Or hey, I like Post Sharp. Post Sharp has a lot of great patterns in it. Let's get Post Sharp. Are we all going to get ReSharper on our team?
Right. We're gonna have you get 2 developers in a room, and you're gonna have 2 strong opinions, which is the catalyst for this show, right?
Right. Yeah, we should really use XUnit. Well, if we're going to use XUnit, we should use test-driven.net. Oh, well, that's going to cost us money. I mean, those things happen to us too, except they're not free.
So
we pay for.
I'm going to stand by my thing that we're settling on using technology that was not designed for the problem we're trying to solve.
That's fine, but that fundamental technology, that statement was incredibly true 20 years ago, but as time goes on, people have been trying to fix the web, and yes, Band-Aids. It has been Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid, but now those Band-Aids have been reinforced with steel, right? And so now...
I don't know about steel.
They're a strong
Maybe straw.
I'm not saying there are no holes. I'm not saying that there are no security concerns, right? I'm not saying it's a perfect platform. I'm saying that given the trade-offs that you have to take, right? These issues that are still to a certain extent relevant, the pros are so much more, right? Like this is the most cross-platform
just works experience.
Yes.
So, you had to bring up a good question. Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Jess, when you do your Gnome Day work, how many things need to be cross-platform? What platforms are people coming to run your day-to-day applications?
That is not an incredibly fair question for me right now because I'm completely internal, right? So I'm not making like public internet applications. I have a very controlled.
And most of the applications, when I'm talking about line of business and high-end data visualization stuff, a lot of that's for internal users.
Sure. So then you're talking about basically ease of development. But then, I mean, if one of your pain points is that you have to learn a whole bunch of stuff, that kind of goes away when you're talking about internal development, right? You guys, you focus on certain frameworks and browsers like we do internally. We have one browser that we support, and we have a handful, a variety of frameworks that we support, and we basically become experts of those. Not to say we just ignore everything else and we fall behind, right? You have to stay on top. You have to see what new frameworks are out there and how they can help you and everything. But that you just add them to your library and kind of maybe get rid of some of the old stuff, right? A new framework comes in, replaces an old one, but you can really concentrate it on certain frameworks. So I think
that's a pain point for a lot of places.
What? Learning?
Well, just standardizing on a set of frameworks and then being able to, hey, we want to upgrade a framework 1 to 2. There's so many places that are like,
it's the platform.
True. My point is the web is more, because it's more open, there's more of this decision points that have to be made, and as a culture, a development world, we tend to have a lot of people who do not want to change things. They want to fix something and stick to it.
So if it's an intranet site, because I think we're venturing away from if I have to support the public internet.
Yeah, but that's
all these concerns. But let's venture, and I agree. Let's venture back to we're building line of business apps internally for business, and as much as IT loved the fact that they could completely stop worrying about installation, upgrade, and upkeep of apps, it shouldn't be that hard. You're saying why don't we just do that, right? Why don't we just do that with a thick client? But then just using web technologies, maybe again the developers don't make it so hard. Like just because a new framework came out, does your intranet line of business app have to take it on?
No, it depends on what you're trying to solve, yeah. And I'm kind of looking more of sort of the best of both worlds. The idea that I could package it up, put it on a server, someone connects to it, there is just enough of a browser that can load it up, fire it off, and then that's what you work with. And I don't need now to then say for my line of business application, well, I need to support Chrome and IE and this version of IE. I have this host, and whatever that host is my common platform to work with. That's my my area of the concern. Again, with Silverlight with out of browser stuff with Silverlight, you had this. You have it with Flex. There have been other technologies that have sort of tried to adopt this. That sort of download from the web, but also have.
So what did they give you? So you started out this whole conversation with Silverlight. Silverlight was king. I forget the quote, but Silverlight never should have died. Silverlight was the perfect.
Silverlight was awesome.
Why? Why? What did it give you over what we have today? I'm not talking about 5 years web development. No. 5 years ago in web development.
Today, I have the idea that I have a single platform, .NET on both sides, or variations of .NET on both sides, in my world, because I'm in a .NET world. I have a strong debugging experience because I can use Visual Studio to debug all that Silverlight code right from the browser. I don't need other tools to figure out how to do these things. Mm-hmm. And when we get really into the details, I could do binary transportation of content back and forth. I had duplexing. Like, it had all the things we're trying to now reinvent for the web. They all existed already for Silverlight.
Mm-hmm. And you could use an application without a browser. And if you use the out-of-browser support, it felt like you were just magically getting a desktop app to the user.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
And then,
okay, so if I'm using Node today on the server, I've got the same language on the server and the client, right? If I'm using, let's say, Visual Studio Code, I know it's still kind of an immature IDE, but it's getting very good debugger support for JavaScript for Node, and so I'm using the same tooling to debug on the server and on the client, right? So I get this same experience. I'm not saying it's literally the same as Silverlight.
Okay, but the army of .NET developers maybe wants to stay in .NET.
There you go, right?
Isn't that okay? Like,
that is totally okay.
Like, Microsoft might have been a bit too hasty in saying Silverlight has no place in this world. No, I think people like Todd were saying, but it does have a place. You gave me a way to deploy an app for my line of business customers that supported printing. It supported this out-of-browser experience. We could keep it evergreen. Like, thank you for doing that. And, well, the fact of the matter is you can go file a new project right now. And, yes, I know every developer shakes their head and says, oh, but I really can't do that. I don't know. You actually kind of can. Compatibility is king in Microsoft platforms.
Except it doesn't work in Edge, but that's a whole other problem.
Right. So the reason that Silverlight died
I guess that's true.
Plugin. Right?
Yeah, the plugin model is the problem.
The plugin model, right? And the plugin model is supposed to build on top of the web. So it uses the web as a delivery platform, which is why LOB loves it, right? That's why internal apps love it. That's why external apps love it too, but then external apps, publicly available internet-facing applications, now need to worry about the broadest browser support possible. So they don't have to worry about that anymore, right? So if you install Silverlight or Moonlight on Mac, you can run my application. That is now the standard platform, and I don't have to worry about compatibility. But then what about iPhone, right? That is, Steve Jobs said, not here, right? And on Android, how do you run it on Android? It doesn't work. What is ubiquitous, because it's mature, I mean, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it is ubiquitous for whatever reasons. So that is the platform of the world right now, right? Which makes JavaScript the language of the world, which is what things like Node.js are embracing.
Yes. But, again, I'm kind of thinking about, we're still dealing with, we're dealing with the DOM directly. We're not thinking out of the box and trying to think more about componentization of things and layers of abstraction. We solved all these problems, right? In DOS, I was able to eventually get to this point where we created VB, we created whatever platform we're going to talk about. All these have been solved. Now we're going to start solving these for the web, and it's going to eventually happen. It's going to probably take another 5-10 years. 10 years from now, you probably will not use, you most definitely won't use jQuery, but you may not even need a lot of these frameworks because a lot more will be built into the browser or built into a framework that's more standard.
Well, which is good. Other than web workers and
well, web components is definitely one area that I think eventually we'll kind of get there.
So what problem did that solve that is not solved today?
So today, if you want to build complex type of applications with grids or charts, you have to work heavily with the DOM, right? No matter what you're trying to do, you just have to know about the DOM. depending on which web component framework you look at, something like a Polymorph, they try to hide that more through templating and what they call the shadow DOM or local DOM. I know with Angular, they're creating components. They're trying to make all this different layer of abstraction. So you're just dealing with, I go into my page and I say, I want the grid. And these are all the properties for the grid.
Yeah.
I'm not putting a div and then firing up jQuery to grab that div and then bulk in thousands of lines of HTML to make things work. It's just, it's arcane.
Well, certainly if you add nothing else, then the HTML, CSS, JavaScript group is page-centric. And they all have to know a little bit about the page, where the web component ideal is I could really work on this component and then use it everywhere, and you get like a sort of namespacing type stuff. You don't have to worry about some code you write over here accidentally goes in.
It's truly modular and components.
Right, which we need. I mean, I think we have to get there. So.
Absolutely.
So again, if there's we use web components as an example, there's like 18 different frameworks that are doing it today, and none of them are standardized yet.
Well, no, it's true, and I think we're feeling out what we want to do, though, right? Because the audience is big. It's not the kind of thing where Microsoft can go squirrel away, and I'm going to pick on them, can go squirrel away and say, well, here's our first shot at it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We'll just kill it and do another one.
They're doing the opposite.
We've done that on the web.
Between Google and Firefox, who's gonna win? They're gonna support whoever the winner is.
That's where frameworks like React are really gaining popularity, because they're solving that problem in a different way, right? So you develop. All that you really care about is that you develop in that way, right? And so you say, here's my style for this component that I'm working on, this one file. They also happen to like to put use JSX to put the HTML right in with the JavaScript, which people swear by, I hate, but whatever. You put it all together in one thing, whether it's one file or a couple files. It's all one component, and then when React renders that out, it takes care of, well, when you said dot customer, right, the customer class, the customer CSS class, what you really meant was component 1, 2, 3, 4 customer class, right, and it kind of scopes it all for you. So it helps solve that problem without browser support. Basically, the framework solves it for you. Right? So there are these things. I'm not saying they're the answer. I'm not saying React is the answer.
And from a DOM point of view, we are trying to make it easier, right? Because we all understand the pain point when these frameworks make it easier. Yeah. But they're only doing one small segment. Yeah. We're not dealing with a multi-threaded thing. We're not dealing with...
what else? So I completely agree. The DOM, and especially the DOM in the sense that it is just one giant page, one global page, and it shares everything.
And in order to change things, you have to constantly keep writing to it and talking to it and dealing with things being moving in and out. Yeah. It's a complexity to deal with.
So other than that,
the multi-threading we talked about, you need a multi-threading environment if you're going to build a complex enough UIs. I've felt the pain across all different platforms, particularly in JavaScript.
I think we'll write more buggy apps if we get multi-threading.
I'm not going to say multi-threading for the software UX.
I'm going to hide under that.
Well, in my case, we can UX experts saying they want to do these things, so
we can set
want a rich experience. Part of the challenge we talked about before about iOS, the iOS experience, everyone wants that for everything now. They want to have that responsive type of application that
you're throwing out things that don't mean anything. I don't know what an iOS type experience means. If you have a user experience that you need so much stuff happening in parallel in the background, I think that's almost by definition a poor experience. Like, why are you doing so much?
We'll use this the classic version, a stock application, right? You have a high-end UI with lots of conditional formatting on different rows and grids, and as data is flowing in from the servers coming in, you need to start pumping in different rules based on if that stock's going up or down, the trend line, and all these things. You need to be able to see a bunch of charts and real-time charting. Like, those are the kind of things I'm talking about.
Right. So redrawing the screen is, I think, that's probably
that's part of the pain. Yes. In an efficient way, but then also handling the data coming in and being able to queue up that data while also re-rendering the screen and not having any to block.
I've done that. I mean, I've done exactly what you're talking about.
We've done it with like SignalR.
Yeah, I've done it with SignalR. It's exactly it, and maybe even WebSocket. I mean, SignalR.
Sure, it doesn't have to be. It could be use just WebSockets.
But that's the data coming in. I mean, what kind of volume of data were you talking about? Millions and millions of records?
No, because if you're bringing millions of records to the client, that's a bad experience.
Yes, that's a bad experience. I'm using an example. It's more about like the not the volume of records, the amount of records coming in. So every second, more data is coming, more data is coming, more data is coming.
It's not. What I'm saying. Why is it coming to the client? Because the user, the person looking at this, cannot comprehend all of that change. So
I'm not a
why
stockbroker.
are
I
you
can't
doing
give you
it,
the
right?
exact reason. I just built enough of these applications to know that's the experience they want.
Okay, if you fill a screen with stock quotes and stock tickers and you're updating it and changing it, then you may run into some problems, but it's certainly not going to be with
Here's another thing.
parallelism, right?
Maybe
It's
you're
gonna be
using the wrong frameworks. Treat it like a
Right.
game. Treat it like a game and use WebGL.
Right, right.
Honestly, I'm being dead serious here. Treat it like a game and use WebGL, and you every 60th of a second take your current state of the world and blast it up there. That's what I would do as a web game developer.
There you go. And could we make that statement 5 years ago? Was WebGL in a mature enough state?
No.
Right. So right, and that's what I'm saying. Like this conversation 5 years ago, or even maybe 2 years ago, might have been drastically different. But my fundamental assertion right now is that the foundation, the lowest common denominator, as you call it, Todd, has risen up so high that the web is an incredibly valid development platform right now.
I still think we're settling. We're trying to jam in a square thing in a round hole.
By definition, we are settling, and that is how we're getting the broadest possible, the broadest possible platform that we can. Right. That's how we're supporting the broadest possible amount of devices.
But maybe that's not necessarily the most important thing. Maybe we should be focusing on solving the business problems we should be trying to solve, and not just settling because the framework is easy to use.
Or if you're talking about a public website, then that is part of the business problem.
Again, we're talking about public websites. That's an entirely different set of use cases.
No,
Why not deploy a thick client then? And I'll tell you, I think sometimes business is too quick to dismiss the thick client. Why not deploy a thick client? Just because they've told you, like as the consultant, we want it on the web.
Yeah, or I mean, people have this expectation of building web applications that behave like desktop apps. I've built these apps for the last 4 or 5 years. I know the pain points.
And sometimes I really wonder, like, well, why didn't they just ask for a desktop app then?
Because the deployment still sucks.
Yeah, or
sure.
Or they have cases where they don't necessarily. They want to be able to say, tomorrow these 100 users go start using this application. Just provide a link. Don't even do things. I've worked in a number of cases where they do the hybrid approach. They host Citrix in a web browser.
Oh God,
which is really, really fun. You log into a web browser and you get a Citrix activation.
And that's slower than just writing a web app.
And then they host a desktop app through that, and
it's crazy slow. And
again, maybe my experience is a little different than your guys, but those are the kind of things that people have been asking me to build. They're asking me to build these. I call them rich experiences or rich internet applications. They're not your content sites. They're not your CRUD type applications. They are very intense applications that have a lot of things going on the UI.
Yeah. If Unity 5 can output to WebGL and I can run a first-person shooter in Firefox,
yes,
then we have the technology. It's that our business developers are still thinking DOM. And look, and I'm going to sit and say it, is maybe we've got to, maybe for these real-time high-performance applications, we got to say, this is actually a game.
Yeah, I definitely know with some of the charting stuff, we've actually started to look at WebGL. There are some weird behaviors, I think. I don't work on the charts, so I don't know the exact details. But I do know that that's some of the things we've been talking about, or SVG, of offering a way for the developer to say, you know what, I don't want to work on a canvas. I want to work in a WebGL experience or SVG experience. Yes. The problem is, WebGL will probably handle lots of things. SVG, if you put more than 10,000 items on a chart, all of a sudden SVG just falls apart.
Yeah.
Again, it really depends on the application you're working on, what you're doing. Again, I'm kind of looking at it as an architect. We need to start thinking about how we take it from where we are now to where we need to go, because these problems have been solved before on other platforms. The use cases and the problems are solved. The web just doesn't have them today.
I don't think the difference is that far. I don't think it's that far from where we are and where we need to go. I think we're more or less there. I agree with you, the DOM, right? I think the DOM is the number one thing right now. That is what makes things slow. That and the fact that, as you alluded to earlier, Chris, you know, the mobile devices, in particular Apple and iOS, deliberately slow down their at least their embedded browsers in an application, right? And they have no real incentive to make their browser applications run really fast because they want you to run applications. But that aside, I mean, the DOM is the slowest thing. Painting and rendering is the slowest thing, but that's because right now, at this point in time, still, the DOM is still really stupid in terms of what it needs to repaint, and that's where we look at things like Shadow DOM,
Yeah.
right? Where you paint these things off screen, where you're not really painting them, and then you only paint the differences. So that splits the difference between what you're talking about, Chris, which is let's just jump all the way down into a graphics engine, right? And we're painting pixels. And so it splits the difference. We write, but we write to a virtual screen, and it figures out what the pixels are that need to update.
Well, I mean, what's being built right now, I think, whether it's being built by framework or it's being built by committee, is, okay, we all know that we want to move on from the DOM, but partially because Microsoft's on the committee, and they always insist on backward compatibility. I mean, they have been the arch enemy of throwing stuff away on the web because they say it's got to be backward compatible. And they're not the only ones, but they're big on it.
Yeah.
So
when they have the investment.
Right. We've got to come up with a way we've got to come up with a new system. This is what Shadow DOM kind of is, right? It's backward compatible. It can go talk to the DOM for us. And then eventually someday, and this could go for all of our frameworks, frankly. I really do believe this. Is like, let's just like imagine a world where something like Shadow DOM or Angular or React, let's say it won, right? Like it has such huge adoption. Well, then what's going to stop a browser vendor from saying, let's stop making our developers ship down that framework. Let's make it native now. Now, I don't know if that day is going to arrive soon, and the reason why I don't think is because I think even Angular, I think they're all still in a rapid maturing state. Like, we're getting Angular 2 soon, and I'm telling you, the moment Angular 2 hits, web developers are going to be saying, we can do better.
Yeah,
and we'll be starting on
Shadow DOM is a spec.
Next?
It's an HTML spec. It's not a framework.
Well, no,
when it's emerging.
It isn't. So what I mean is, like,
standard by any means at all right now.
But like React's concept of their virtual DOM.
Right. Virtual DOM.
I agree with you. There is the W3 like Shadow DOM.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, that's our way forward. So let's get this working, and then maybe someday we can strip this away.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the way it's going to move. I think. I mean, I really do.
And again, for the DOM, eventually I think we'll get there. I'm pretty confident web components will happen in some form. What framework would ever become popular, it is to be determined. But that's still just one piece. I'm going to go back to the multi-threading because that's just a pain point I've dealt with. Multi-threading, memory management. Have you guys ever tried to figure out how the garbage collector works in a browser?
Well, a lot of people don't know how the .NET one works either.
I understand they may not know it. Doesn't mean they have to
worry about problems, right? Like,
all of a sudden you have thousands of objects to deal with, and you have to be like, hey, before I magically hide this part of this div and now throw this other thing up here, I need to make sure all this memory goes away before I do that.
Yeah,
object pooling.
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, object pooling, right? Like you can get into that place where you're allocating so much that maybe you need to consider an object pool or consider something that helps you, like in Scripton. And Scripton helps you get there. It says, hey, I'll object pool for you.
Or you're relying on Angular to clean up itself, and eventually.
And then they're not. Traditionally they weren't very good at it. Maybe it's better in 2. I don't know.
Yeah.
So we also have we've got. Our previous guest, Matt Hornsby, is over in our Q&A section. I can hear him screaming.
Yes.
So he says, the browser is a great platform, a great development platform for that browser. What about testing every browser on every device in the world, like when working on very large retail websites?
I would say first the answer is true, and second the answer is if you didn't make a website, you have the problem anyway, because now you've got to build an iOS app, an Android app,
Yeah, no,
the problem.
The problem is the fact that when you build an Android app, it's one Android app. It's not.
Which Android app? No. Which Android? No. Which Android device is it going to work on?
Well, no, there's no such thing as an Android app.
That's what we tell people too. We've got a very good okay, I don't care what platform you want. What is the physical device? You want to put Samsung this with these specs? We'll test it.
You want it to work on a Kindle Fire?
If there's a problem,
how far back?
We'll deal with it when the problem comes up. You need to specify specifically.
Should it work on a Roku? Should it work on
no?
Oh my God!
Amazon Fire? Yes. No.
Should it work on a Fire Stick?
Physical devices. And we actually got to the point where you will buy the devices for us and send it to us, and those are what we'll test with.
I couldn't believe
Wild West.
I mean, I don't. Right, Android is it's the web browser of mobile platforms, right?
Yeah, he's 6 of mobile platforms.
Because I mean, when I did an Android app, I was stunned by how much I had to think about the API surface I wanted to support, needed to support.
Yeah.
would have pleasurable to support, hate myself for supporting, like all of those things.
Do they have caniuse.com for Android?
No, it was awful. It was awful. Now, look, praise Apple maybe for saying, take control of the device, and I'm gonna keep you moving unless you haven't bought a phone in a while, and then I'm just gonna screw you.
Or an iPad. iPad's even more.
Because I will tell you right now that I have a major pet peeve, and this isn't just Apple. This is every device vendor. We have evergreen browsers on our desktops, but we can't have them on mobile.
Yeah.
And is there a real reason for that other than that? Well, it's time for you to buy a new phone. You got to inject some cash into our ecosystem.
Yes.
Well, because every app store auto updates anyway. You can turn that on, right? So
for apps, right? Why would I encourage you to build great mobile websites when I can get you to build apps that I take a cut from?
Yeah.
I am being cynical, but the incentive will guide. Even if you are true blue awesome engineers working at Apple and Google, I love the mobile web. I crave the mobile web. Your employer has a business case for not making the mobile web succeed.
Yeah.
It's an invisible guiding principle.
So kind of bring us back to JavaScript and the web browser and stuff. So what are your guys' thoughts? Like, what do you see things like web components and WebAssembly solving this problem? It's going to fall flat on their face, and we're going to kind of still work with jQuery and like Angular frameworks 5 years from now? Like, what do you see as, we've talked about the problems, what is ultimately the solution in your opinion?
I think the final two pieces of the puzzle that are still not as mature as everything else, or just completely immature, are web components, a modular component-driven thing where I can make changes to one section and not worry about it bleeding out into other things. I can sum that up by web components, or rather, web components solves that problem. So if we had web components, it wouldn't be as difficult. I think the web component spec, as it's defined today, is pretty much dead on the vine. Whether or not it can be kind of reinvigorated and actually implemented successfully, that's yet to be seen. I kind of feel like unless Microsoft and Google in particular really start kind of reinvigorating it and talking seriously about it, I think it's pretty much dead. But something has to take its place. We have
Angular 2 is going to take its place in the vacuum.
No. That's a framework, right? I mentioned that. Yeah, React has the virtual DOM, which kind of solves a similar problem. But it cannot be a framework thing. It has to be in the browser. The browser has to solve the issue.
The browser vendors are afraid now, though.
What?
I mean, see how they've all pulled back and said, we're not implementing anything until another browser does it? There was a time when they wouldn't do that.
They're all playing chicken.
On the Microsoft blog, at the Internet Explorer blog, they flat out said the way that IE, and kind of the reason that we're killing IE, is because the way that it's implemented, the way that it's architected, literally could never support an implementation of web components, of Shadow DOM, right? But the Shadow DOM is the web components as a whole, and actually Shadow DOM kind of falls under the umbrella of web components, or at least it's required for web components to work. Shadow DOM solves the other problem, which is that the DOM is just incredibly slow. Specifically, repainting the screen is very slow. And so those are the two issues that I've run into most frequently in my web development that have still gotten me very frustrated. I mean, Todd, you mentioned earlier that the number of frameworks available, you kind of said it as a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. I think that gives you choice, but there are a couple of clear, quote, winners, or at least the ones that are way ahead of the pack. So if you want to choose one that has very strong support, you've got several to choose from, and they're probably not going away anytime soon, and you'll be able to get plenty of support for them. If you want to choose a more specialized one, you've got that as well, right? So there's plenty of frameworks, and there's choose your poison, right? So there's an MVC framework, or something that pretends to be an MVC framework. I'm not going to get into that right now, but there's Angular, and especially I'm especially excited about Angular 2 that encourages component-based design, like the design itself, right? The framework drives component-based design. And then you have React, which isn't even an MVC framework at all. It's really just the Vue part of the framework, but it does that so well that you tie that with just a little bit of of AJAX calls and a little bit of kind of state management, and you've got a working application. So in other words, that framework emphasizes the view so much and so well that it really kind of lessens the need for any kind of a model or controller in the background, right? And then, things like Bootstrap is the grid layout of the web. It's the de facto winner. Yes, there are plenty of others out there, but the reason that designers hate Bootstrap so much is because every site looks like Bootstrap. The reason every site looks like Bootstrap is because it's awesome, right? It works. And developers can just use it, and they don't have to be designers.
Not all developers would agree with you on that statement.
Not all developers?
Yes, would agree with you.
Well, I mean, what I like
Not
about
all developers
it,
agree on anything.
I mean, I'll tell you the one thing I do like about it is that you can just use the pure CSS bootstrapped and strip out the stuff you're not using, and you're not taking down stuff you don't need. Because that's the thing that does bug me about frameworks is if I take a dependency on a big framework, whether I don't care what it is, Angular, React, maybe Aurelia, and I don't use part of it, I'm still eating it. I'm eating the download costs. That's
the design. Again, that's any platform, right? So that's the.
Oh no, that problem doesn't go away with .NET. I take the whole full framework to do a Hello World.
That's where frameworks like jQuery UI, they put a huge emphasis in that. Like, pick your point. What do you want to do? Are you going to use this component, right? And you can kind of pick a la carte. It's a Chinese menu. You say, yeah, I'm going to take these 5, right?
Yeah.
So that's just how the framework implements it. That's not really anything having to do with the platform.
Well,
so I think it's a really good option.
Yeah. I think one thing we can come back to is we sort of touched on JavaScript, and I honestly think it's a whole other show to say, okay, now let's compare JavaScript development to some options that are out there today, like WebAssembly on its way, LLVM and Scripton, something else, Dart, quit transpiling, or gosh, I wish we just had C++. Like, that's like a whole other conversation. That
we have TypeScript.
Yeah.
No one likes that but you. Move on. Let's move on.
TypeScript.
No, I'm dead serious. Right? I mean, we don't necessarily need to get into this now.
But that's the transpiling solution. But again, yeah, I don't think that's the same thing as the question of the browser as an app delivery platform versus.
No.
Is that what you're saying, Todd? Is what you're saying is like, it doesn't have to be Silverlight. But if we had something,
Cordova. Use Cordova as a perfect example. If I could run Cordova as not as something I deploy physically install your device or your PC, but I could go tell someone, here, download this Cordova package, and then there was just enough stuff it could download it and then run it in IE, we'll say, or Chrome, whatever it would be.
Isn't that like UWP? Like, go to the store and get my app, and it's gonna work and install and uninstall cleanly. Isn't that it?
To a degree, but I still need to write that as a UWP app, not as a web app.
I don't understand. Cause are you arguing for the browser as a platform? Because Cordova is a browser-based platform.
It is. It's sort of like I want Cordova, or even like something like Electron. I want to assign I kind of want two things, right? I want a host that's not necessarily a physical browser the user uses to navigate the web, and then I want a common framework that you work in that common framework. You do X. I want to show a dialog window. It's just a way to do it.
You have that, right? So if you take away the navigation of the browser, and I know that's easier said than done, but like if you ignore the URL, if you ignore the back button and the refresh button and everything, and you just use the browser window as your host, you've got your host, and your common API is the DOM, specifically the HTML APIs that are becoming more and more standard, and the core ones that are your 80-90% use case, they are standard, at least standard enough, and then you've got JavaScript is your language, or if you want to raise that up a level, you've got TypeScript.
But again, they're not solving the problem. They're just other band-aids on top. If I had like I said, I use dialog window as an example because that was something I was looking up. If you talk about .NET or even I guess Java, it's been a while since I've done Java. You have a dialog class. I don't have that in the JavaScript world, right? I have to create a div.
I have an alert.
That's a message box. That's not a free.
What are you talking about? Bootstrap has a standard dialog class. Just use that.
Bootstrap does, and Angular does, and jQuery does, and all of a sudden
I'll tell you what is kind of nice about the current model is that today you have Bootstrap as a de facto standard, and then when you find that you like something else, you don't have to wait for browsers to implement it.
Right. Yeah.
Because the problem we're always going to have is even if we came up with that common, let's say we came up with that unified thing, and it was awesome, and it made it into the evergreen browsers and the next versions of all the phones. Well, the phones are going to get stale. We already know that. It looks like the desktop browsers are trying to keep us up to date. That's cool. But then the phones are going to get stale. So now I have to invent something to let me write code once and run on all the phones too.
Right.
Unless we can somehow change that world, that devices don't.
Again, I'm not trying to solve all the world's problems. I'm just looking at the current pain point of what I've dealt with the last few years.
Is it just multi-threading? Because you keep
Well,
going.
that's one of the pain points.
You keep going back to that.
Well, I was using that as an example other than dumb.
But you were using Cordova as an example of it done right. There's at least what it sounded like. And I'm pointing out that is a browser platform. That's a browser development platform. So I don't understand
for the host part, yes, it is. It is a host. Even though you talk about UWP, I could use WinJS. Those are hosts.
Right?
Oh man, you can use UWP with your web app. I'm telling you, I've done it. Like you don't have to change anything. That's the thing I show people all the time is like there's this impression out there, and I know I don't know how we got on UWP. That was my fault. That was my fault, right?
Yes,
people have this impression out there that no, UWP JavaScript is some different special thingy. Well, it is when you want to get into Windows-specific stuff that a browser could have no possible conception of, like your user folder. But if you aren't doing that, you just go index HTML and use the framework of your choice, and it works, and it's downloadable from the store and whatever.
Yeah. Again, but then I have to download from the store. Or from Cordova, that's still kind of the store model. I kind of want the best of both worlds. Where's it
going to download from? I mean, and again, there's a solution to not download from the store now.
Yeah.
It wasn't that way in Windows 8 timeframe, but there is now. I guess the reason why I bring it up is I'm saying, isn't that your answer? Because you were saying I might just be on one platform, like, okay, which I agree with you. Maybe it doesn't have to be multi-platform. Maybe it can just be Windows. Maybe we can select our operating system. Maybe we can select our quote-unquote browser. Well, scratch the word browser out and say it'll be UWP apps, and we'll deploy them in the enterprise fashion.
Yeah, I mean, there always an enterprise store yet, though, is there, for UWP?
I think there's an enterprise deployment pattern, right?
There wasn't one at one point.
Yeah.
Maybe there's one now. I'm not sure.
It wasn't in Windows 8 for sure. They talked about how sideloading required a special version of the OS, and you had to write a note to Bill Gates, and it was
no, there's an enterprise store.
But there's a solution now.
Yep.
And even iOS used to have this, but with iOS, it's kind of weird what you have to make it all sort of work for the in-house versus external stores. And I think we're going to get it off point. My point is, as a architect, when I look at these problems, I see lots of frameworks and lots of solutions, but they're all kind of all over the place, and I have to pick and choose what I want, which is good and bad. I won't disagree with you. It's a good thing in some cases, but as a person that then has to go help people build systems on top of this stuff, it's a barrier for entry. It's a huge barrier for entry. It's just a lot of complexity that gets added, and it makes it harder to build the apps.
And that isn't significantly different than any other development platforms. That's my final.
Final argument is no different. It's immature compared to those other platforms.
Well, right. Try to use .NET to build on every device, right? You have your Xamarin solution, then you have your thick client solution.
We're not doing that. So, again, it really depends on your use case, what you're trying to do.
Do you have any closing remarks, Chris?
Yeah, look, I agree, Todd, that sometimes the browser can be a sad place to live and you want to cry. I get it. But you know the hope that I see in it is that it's the only tool that we have to fight against vendor lock-in in hardware. Because as much as a particular vendor, and I'm not going to pick on any of them because it doesn't matter, wishes that you use their apps and their app stores, they've still got to have some base level of mobile web support or people will bail. And I think that's our wedge. That's our wedge to say we're still going to have an open platform and nobody's going to lock us in. I really think that's the key.
Yeah. And you, listener, what do you think? Is the browser an amazing development platform, or do you just basically hate every minute that you're working in it? Do you have any tips or ways to think about browser-based development that help make it easier or more enjoyable? We'd love to know. Please leave a comment on the website, staticvoidpodcast.com, or send an email to comments@staticvoidpodcast.com. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on the show, please feel free to let us know through those same channels. We want to make sure that we're talking about the things that you want to hear about. So Todd, Chris, thanks for the chat.
Yep.
And thank you, listener, for spending the time with us. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Static Void Podcast. Well, that is a show. That was good. I'm not sure we really, did anything.
I think hopefully we raised discussions for people to have.
Yeah,
the funny thing is, like,
a lot.
I love all these frameworks and things. To me, they're great. New frameworks are great and something new to learn. It's the reality of then trying to help other people learn it and standardizing things. It's just a pain.
That is true across all platforms.
True.
We spent years
again,
teaching web forums, ASP.NET
Or then
MVC.
WPF. And
I
then
guess
people would write WPF the way they wrote WinForms. And
nobody knows WPF still,
Yeah.
even still today, right?
Right.
But you think about it this way: if it's from Microsoft, it's much easier to fight that argument than it's.
I just said
let's go
nobody
use
knows how to
framework
use
X
WPF
from
still
some random
today.
website. Huh?
I just said WPF is the perfect example. Nobody understands really how to use it today.
I don't use WPF. I build enough freaking applications with
I
it.
do think I do think it was just completely tossed aside. I mean, people were like happy with WinForms.
It was.
No. The problem was with all the templating and all the XAML ended up becoming a nightmare.
Yeah, it was true.
Anything beyond the basics.
Right. Because the XAML is another language that you had to learn, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same paradigm as the web.
What was the export we wanted here?
I mean, look, we have
FLAC, right?
FLAC. Yeah.
FLAC. Okay.
We have bad parts in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and we haven't been able to get rid of them. You know, there's bad tags. There's bad CSS.
But we can work. It's very easy to just not.
You cannot use them. Yeah.
Right.
So
That's
have
the part of the show.
any of you looked at Electron? At all?
I know what it is. That's the extent of it. Is I know what it is.
So it's really hard to find the Hello World example. I'm still trying to find it. But
no, if you go on their site, I found it today. If you go on their site and scroll all the way down, there's a getting started. There's literally a GitHub repo that you can clone. That is a JavaScript file and an HTML file.
So I just went to the API reference, and they have like dialog window, menu. It's just there. I don't have to think. I don't have to worry about all that detail.
Bootstrap has that too, which is why I chose Bootstrap. What Electron is a framework, you know.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not. It's a whole other framework. It just happens to move for desktop JavaScript. I don't know. To me, that's sort of where we need to get to. We need to move on from.
We're there. Bootstrap.
No, we're not there yet. Bootstrap is. I've worked with plenty enough people who hate Bootstrap. They despise using Bootstrap.
Why? I think those people are ridiculous. I've run into a lot of them too, and almost all of them, I think probably all of them, were designers, and basically the only real argument I could get them to make against it was the whole web looks like Bootstrap, which I know that offends their aesthetic senses.
I'd have to get the person involved because I mean he's a developer and he has a very unique way of doing CSS that works really well.
There you go.
Don't agree 100% with his.
Yeah, you're right. So I basically discount any of his opinions because anybody who thinks that they have a special way of doing it is special. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying they can go off and be special. The rest of us, we're going to use Bootstrap because he can go and make an application, and then I join his team. I have no idea what's going on. It's not good.
Well, no, that's the trade-off to it.
It's not a trade-off. That's a deal breaker. To have
Bootstrap is not a silver bullet. There's plenty of problems with Bootstrap.
I'm not saying Bootstrap is perfect, but no framework is perfect, and it gets you so much farther than just standard web, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've run into many a .NET project that you walk into and say, "What the heck did they do here?"
Yes, right.
Pretty much every project.
These problems aren't.
That was one common theme I think we had all correct was. Every framework has these problems, or every platform has these problems.
Yes.
Just the web is just a more Wild West.
Yes.
There is no Microsoft or Google that's sort of, here's the standard way of doing things. You can do 100 other things, but here's sort of the standard way. So, I don't know.
All right. Well,
hopefully people got something.
That's a show.
I've already stopped recording.
Yeah. I'm good too.
I gotta go upload it.
Oh, yeah. Let me unplug my guy here. All right, well, that's my first show on my new recorder. Let's see what happens.
I thought last time you did it. You didn't do it last time?
Oh, well, I did, but I didn't use it.
No, you didn't use it.
Because
Okay.
we used that recording.
I'm just going to upload a FLAC file directly. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah. It's good.
I don't think I installed 7-zip.
Uh-oh. I forgot to hit record, guys. We got to have that show over again.
Are you being serious?
No. I will be serious one time, though. I will definitely forget to because I have to hit it twice. You hit record first to like put it in get ready mode, and then hit it again to actually record.
Nice.
Well, let me. No, I'm not going to speak too soon. Let me make sure that I did hit record.
You just have to record yourself again and argue with me. So have you guys seen the I think it's DirecTV commercial where the people are settlers?
Yes.
You guys are settlers. You're settled for the crappy web. There is a better way.
I just don't know that the problem's different. That's kind of where I agree. Is I feel like I have just as many problems.
Right. We could sit here and have this same conversation about Java versus .NET, WPF versus WinForms. It's development versus development, right? But there are some legitimate concerns in there, right? Like the DOM. Like there are parts of this that are just really painful and maybe deal breakers, but it's not like people don't know how to use it. Like that's ubiquitous. What is this show called? I feel like this is 2 or 3 shows.
We were at 1 or 15 minutes.
Well, we brushed JavaScript, which I think is good, because there's the whole, should there be a better language?
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
That's what I thought this was going to be.
Oh, I actually didn't. I thought this was going to be browser, and then we'd have another one that was language.
Well, for me, one of the biggest problems that I brought it up in the beginning is the interaction between the DOM and the JavaScript runtime, right? They're like coming from 2 different worlds. It's like city folk and country folk, right? It's just like not the same, and they have to get along.
So other than VBScript, I've never tried to use a new language. I think I used C# once. There was some C# thing that worked in the browser one time. I actually personally like Active Documents. I think we totally missed the boat back in 1998.
What?
Active Documents.
What is that? That sounds vaguely familiar.
Active Documents was before government tried to break up Microsoft.
It was
They had
Microsoft?
built in VB into the browser. The VB runtime was built in the browser. So you would write your VB code, compile it to an .doc, I think it was, or it's a .doc or something, and you just put it on your server. It downloaded it, and you had your pseudo plugin, your ActiveX type plugin, and use VBScript to talk to it outside. All the fun things.
Did it not? Where did it put the podcast?
I see it.
Do you?
Yeah.
In 517?
Yeah, I see yours. Mine's uploading.
All right, we can probably stop broadcasting now.
Sure. We should have more debate.
I know, right? I'm ready to keep going. All right. Wow, we got up to 3 viewers there for a minute. Well,
good.
thanks, Matt, for watching.
Yes. Thanks for the question.
All right.
Person X and Y.
Signing off.